Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Euractiv hybrid conference, Building Back Better following a turbulent January. My name is Georgi Gotev. I'm a journalist with Euractiv, and I cannot start this session without expressing my solidarity with the people of Ukraine and also my sympathy for the innocent victims during the sad January events. But let's move forward. We have a great panel. We have three panelists present and two professors joining us online. We have an audience, a physical audience here in Brussels in our office, and a larger audience online. In terms of housekeeping, you will be able to ask questions. I have here a magic tablet where I will read your questions. The system is called Slido, and those online, you will see the Slido on your screens, while those present here, you have instructions at your seats how to use the system. And I see that the system already works. So, without further ado, we will start. We will have some, I would say, rather short initial statements to allow for a discussion, both between the panelists, but also engaging with the audience. And I will give the floor without further ado to Roman Vasilenko, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan. We know each other for many years. I think we have been through a lot of important moments in the development of the country. I'm glad that you are back at your position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You have been ambassador to Slovakia for 2 years, and yeah, it was a short stint, but I think the ministry needs you today. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, dear Georgi. A great pleasure to be here with you and to address the audience here in Brussels and online. I am indeed here to talk about the efforts that our president and our government are implementing to overcome the consequences of what was a shocking event for us in the beginning of January. And I am happy to say that our president has decided to respond to these shocking events by doubling down on reforms, by vowing to build a new Kazakhstan, meaning a more resilient, more open and more diversified economy that offers opportunities for all, not just the privileged few, that New Kazakhstan also means a more fair society, which provides for the opportunities for even the most disadvantaged to share in the wealth of the country. And of course, that means a more agile, competitive political system that also allows more opportunities for people to participate in the affairs of the state and to decide how to run the country. On all three directions, the president has set out his vision. The most significantly, he set out this vision in his State of the Nation address, which was moved 6 months earlier and which was delivered on March 16th. It's called New Kazakhstan, the Path of Renewal and Modernization. The main message, the main thrust of the president's reform agenda is to turn Kazakhstan from a super presidential republic into a presidential republic with a strong parliament. Overall, up to 30 amendments will be introduced into our constitution, and about 20 more laws will be introduced before the end of the year. The depth and the scope of these reforms even allowed our president to call what he's planning to do in Kazakhstan, to call it a second republic. Some may argue how deeply these reforms go, but I think this is very significant, and I think indeed the president's speech on March the 16th was perhaps one of the most historic and important ones of his presidency. And I'm not going to go into details. I have a speech prepared for like 45 minutes, but of course, for the sake of saving time, I cannot list all of those reforms. But I will just mention that, again, the bottom line is there will be a more competitive political system that will allow for more open process for registration of political parties. This will create the opportunities for political parties to compete and to get into the parliament, because the main message of the president is that the opposition needs to be not on the streets but in the parliament. In terms of the economic reforms, the key message is that Kazakhstan is now engaged in the de-oligopolization and demonopolization of the country to indeed create access for all the willing individuals and companies to participate in economic development, to get access to proper and relatively cheap credit, and generally to cut red tape, etc. And in terms of the transformation of our society, the goal is to build a society where we come back perhaps to the cult of labor, to the cult of education, to the cult of social responsibility, if we can call it a cult. But basically, the idea is to build a society which values hard work, which values knowledge, and which values hard labor, and which values social responsibility. So perhaps for the sake of time, I'll stop here, and I will be happy to participate in the discussion later.
Dear Roman, don't worry. I'm sure most of the questions will be for you, and you will have plenty of time to go much deeper. When you said the Second Republic, do you mean like France now? They are in the Fifth Republic.
And you know, the constitution will be changed, and 30 amendments to the constitution means that amendments will be introduced into 1/4 of the articles of the constitution. So it is indeed a significant change, and well, according to our president, that is tantamount to changing the political system.
Luc Devigne, you are French, but this doesn't matter because you represent the European Union, so we are not going to discuss the 5 French republics, but rather the situation in Kazakhstan and the relations with the European Union. Luc Devigne, with whom as well we know each other for many years, now is Deputy Managing Director responsible for Eastern Europe and Central Asia in the European External Action Service. It's been a period, COVID period and so on, we lost a little bit contact, so if you can catch up with the latest developments in a few minutes, that would be much appreciated. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Georgi, and thank you for inviting us. And good afternoon, honourable members of the European Parliament. Dear Roman, good to see you back in business, and ladies and gentlemen in the room and beyond the screens. First of all, let me certainly echo your words of sympathy for the victims in Kazakhstan in January and in Ukraine as of February, and unfortunately ongoing. And what we're seeing with this attempted invasion by Russia of Ukraine, which has brought war back, is an aggression against an independent sovereign state. And this goes against fundamentally international order and the values for which we stand, including independence of states, their sovereignty, territorial integrity, all values that we share with Kazakhstan. And I would like to say also that this is much more than, as it is attempted sometimes to present it as Russia against the West. This is basically President Putin against those who value these principles that I've just highlighted. And you have seen, of course, a very robust and quick reaction by the European Union in what constitutes an unprecedented package of sanctions, far-reaching. But despite the COVID, despite the events also in January 2022, we never stopped our cooperation with Kazakhstan, which is who's a strategic partner for us, very important country. Of course, the events in January raised a number of questions in various European Union circles. We've appreciated the openness and the dialogue that's been engaged by Kazakhstan, and we have received more than once, not only, of course, President Tokayev, whom we had received in December, but also after the events, senior officials of his administration, Mr. Suleimanov and Mr. Kazakh, and this is much appreciated. It's also opportunity, of course, to discuss wider agenda. I think to summarize on our position on these events is one, it is important that investigation is being made in independent manner, and that any human rights abuses, including by law and order community, be investigated, properly prosecuted, and that this shows also a different approach by Kazakhstani authorities from perhaps past events. It's been often said that this was same as events that took place Zhanaozen 10 years ago. I think it's important for the Kazakhstani authorities to show that situation is different, approach is different, and result will be different. Now, coming back to what Roman was mentioning, which is this 16 March speech by the president and the announced reforms, and we had opportunity to discuss this in depth with our Kazakhstani friends, and we will do it tomorrow during the cooperation committee that Roman and I will co-chair, which will touch a very vast number of fields of cooperation. There's 29 actually chapters of cooperation in our bilateral agreement between EU and Kazakhstan. But we will also, of course, touch the political situation. What will matter, I think, is the implementation. I mean, the principles or the intentions that Roman has just highlighted, I think, resonate very much with what lies in our bilateral agreement, with also what has been discussed outside the bilateral agreement during our contacts. We advocated and were very happy that it was set up a council with Kazakhstani authorities to discuss business problems, since you were mentioning the oligarchization or demonopolization of the businesses. We have our human rights dialogue. We have a number of areas that you were touching upon, and that upon which the constitution reform will also touch upon, are very much at the heart of our relationship. So indeed, these events, how no matter how sad they were or tragic they were or they are, is also represent also an opportunity for us to take a new start with our relations. Although, and I will finish by that, to say that our relation has never been bad, and that EU and Kazakhstan have a long-standing, I would say, positive relations, and that contrary to what some have always tried to portray, our agreements on our relation with countries, including countries who have notorious good relations with other ones, are not aimed at a zero-sum game, and we never asked others to be less friends. Of course, in the sanctions policy that the EU has undertaken, it will be important that we see countries not trying to circumvent these sanctions, and we will be very vigilant in that. But for the time being, we have discussed with Kazakhstani authorities, and we will continue to discuss that they do not undertake circumventing, and for the time being, we do not believe they will do so. On the contrary, I think they plan to have a monitoring system that would be helpful and transparent in this regard. But again, like for the reforms announced in 16 March, implementation will be the key. Thank you.
Luc Devine, I'm going to ask you a journalistic question. I'm tempted to ask it because there were a crisis moment when Russia sent troops to Kazakhstan in accordance with the Treaty for the Collective Security Treaty Organization. And if you can share with us, how much worried you were at the External Action Service at that time, and have you been reassured that, well, nothing terrible happened?
Well, by definition, since we respect territorial integrity of independent states, we're not going to be the ones to tell the Kazakhstani what they should do or not do. What we're observing, of course, with I would say scrutiny and attention is two things. First, how long these foreign troops stayed in Kazakhstan, and they seem to have leave quite quickly. So that's a good point. The second point is the events in which they were involved. These and other law enforcement, but also other people who took part in this violence. We were skeptical on some part of the official narrative. Let's be honest with this, but we also believe that Kazakhstan authorities were faced with something quite extraordinary, and so again, what matters is more how they will handle this, and if the investigation which has been announced will bring result in a transparent manner, this will be positively appreciated. And of course, I cannot speak for the whole European Union because European Union is very vast. I can only speak for the High Representative, but there will be, of course, scrutiny amongst various member states and the European Parliament. You have seen the European Parliament took a very harsh resolution. Of course, Parliament is independent, so we do not interfere with this. I'm sure. But let's say that we were very surprised that a resolution can already indicate who's guilty and who's not before investigation takes place. So our view is much more to observe the way the Kazakhstani authorities will handle the consequences of these events.
So you help me a lot because I'm going to ask, of course, a member of the European Parliament, Andris Ameriks, whether this resolution was hasty. Let me say that Mr. Ameriks represents the Socialist and Democrat group in the European Parliament. He's from Latvia, meaning that when you were born and when Roman were born, you were living in the same country. Which I think helps for the mutual understanding. It helps a lot. In any case, you have the floor. You have your short time for a initial statement, but it will be really interesting to if you can share with us whether you personally find that this resolution wasn't a little bit hasty.
Thank you very much, my colleagues, Mr. Deputy Minister, and listeners. I think the time now is so very difficult. It's absolutely understandable for everyone. And first, I would like to underline one very important thing. As I understand the relationship between EU and Kazakhstan was and is and will be so quite good. And we just checking how we support each other. Yes, the very important thing happened in January, and it's created some uncertainties. What happened in future? Because it's two ways. One is to go to authoritarian regime, or as the same in different countries around. Another thing is how they implement the new situation and to propose some democratic reforms. And I think this is so important today. We will discuss two main topics. One topic is about, how we say, all the political reforms proposed by President Tokayev. Yes, it's so very serious, and if we look now what happened in the war, it's absolutely it's a brutal war between Russia coming invasion to Ukraine. It's so important for us to see how the neighboring countries just do what is possible today, just create a new reform process, and this topic is in political field. Second, I think, is a economical topic, how they develop the economy, because they are so dependent sometimes from Russian part, and how the all relations between from past, now they can go ahead and just find another partners and find the our separate economy for future. And as I read today, for example, yes, the Kazakhstan informed the whole society that they change routes, economical routes, not through the Russia, but looking to Caspia, looking to Baltics country ports, just to looking the another partners in economical field. I think now Kazakhstan is one of the most important body in the Central European area. I think the development of the Kazakhstan and implementing of the new reforms is important for our relationship between EU and Kazakhstan, and in according this war what created Russia in Ukraine. I think this is one more obstacle how we just look the approach of other neighboring countries around Russia. And Kazakhstan is one of the most important in this case, what I can say briefly now.
Thank you very much. I think that we will come back to the impact of the war in Ukraine on Kazakhstan due to its the type of the economic relations it has with the Russian Federation, being member of the Eurasian Economic Union. By the way, I would like to say for our audience that I discussed these issues 2 days ago with Timur Süleymanov, who is the first deputy chief of the presidential administration. You can find the interview with Euractiv, and he gave a lot of details on the strategies of the country, because, as he says, Kazakhstan is not part of this conflict, briefly speaking. But let's continue forward. Our panel has also an online dimension, and the next speaker on my list is Dr. Christopher Primiano. He's director, China and Central Asia Studies Center, which I believe is based in Almaty. You have the floor, Dr. Primiano.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me for this. I really appreciate this opportunity. So I think it's important to distinguish between the changes that should take place in terms of moving forward versus the changes that actually will take place. Because I'm skeptical that the changes that should take place actually will take place. And so for changes that should take place, both in political and economic fields. So for political, there needs to be both electoral democracy and participatory democracy. So for electoral democracy, for example, as of now, there are no elections at the mayoral level for towns, for cities. Just a couple of years ago at the village level that started, but right now, there are no elections for mayors of cities or governors, and the elections need to be competitive. So in terms of electoral democracy, there should be significant reforms made to allow for the advancement of electoral democracy. And then for participatory democracy, currently, if people want to protest, and there have been numerous protests in Almaty in the past several weeks, but those protests have to be approved by the government. And so it's good that the government approved these recent protests here in Almaty, but there needs to be more room for civil society, for social movements to advance. And so that is essential, both the electoral component and the participatory component. Significant changes should be made regarding those two areas. And then in terms of economics, I would say that more of a social safety net, because there's huge economic inequality in the country. I mean, the country's, according to the government's Gini coefficient, the Gini coefficient, which measures income inequality in a given country, is very, very low, but I'm skeptical of that. I do not think it's that low. Because according to one study, you have 162 people in the country possessing more than half of the country's wealth. So that indicates tremendous economic inequality in the country. Low pay for many jobs. And so the reason for what happened with the events of early January, starting off due to the doubling of liquefied petroleum gas, so starting off due to economic factors, discontent with economic factors, but then morphing into more political factors, the discontent with the lack of transparency here in the country. The lack, again, as talked about before, the lack of electoral democracy, lack of participatory democracy. So both of these areas, a political economy approach is needed in terms of preventing something like an early January from happening again. Now, I recognize that democracy is not a panacea. As Churchill said, it's the worst form of government except for all the rest. And so nonetheless, these types of reforms, in my view, should be made, especially respect for property rights, rule of law, transparency. These factors need to be addressed in order to move forward. And I'd be happy to, and regarding the tax system, like the flat tax in which everyone pays 10%, there should be a progressive tax system in the country in which that funds can be distributed more in terms of social spending, in terms of benefiting the many, as opposed to 162 people possessing more than half of the country's wealth. So I'd be happy to go into more detail about any of those during the debate session.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Premiano. All right. Last but not least, Dr. Luka Ancheski, Professor of Eurasian Studies, University of Glasgow. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, and it's great to participate in such interesting debate. So the 6 weeks that were comprised between the events of January in Kazakhstan and the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine are, to my mind, the most crucial in the history of post-Soviet Kazakhstan, because they really highlighted the gargantuan tasks that are faced by the current administration. And it is interesting that this talk, as in the title, Building Back Better. So, because I regard these events, these 6 weeks, as a clear watershed, in the sense that what was before is no longer relevant now. So there has been a time of change. And I echo all of the recommendations that have been made by the fellow panelists before, but I will make 2 suggestions on how to build back better, if you want. And one relates to the economy and the other one to foreign policy, but it's a very clear domestic implication. So I totally agree with Chris. This is it's a matter of making the country, the economy, more equal by eroding monopolies and destroying the oligarchy that has been built in 30 years. But there is one more dimension which I think is probably more important, and is trying to diminish Kazakhstan's reliance on energy. energy export, particularly in the hydrocarbon era. Mr. Vasylenko is young, so he, as person in government, he should be worrying for the generation to come. And to my mind, the structure of the Kazakhstani economy now, it's unsustainable for the longer term. We would like to see Kazakhstan to be ready for the post-oil economy, because I think that having a less hooked economy on the oil and gas will make not only a more sustainable Kazakhstan for the generation to come, but also a fairer economy, because a lot of the monopolies that have been built in the last 30 years are built on the energy sector. The second comment which I like to make departs from a sentence which I believe Mr. Vasylenko himself said a couple of days ago, is that Kazakhstan does not want to be behind the high iron curtain which is inevitably falling. And I welcome this remark. They clearly show that multivectorism is still alive. This is a debate which we're having quite publicly in the last few weeks, but which shows that there is an intention to keep cooperating with institutions and states that make of values an important segment of the international dealings. And to this end, I would say that one of the first things which the government of the country should do, especially to differentiate what was before with what is now, is pursuing a serious, thorough, transparent investigation of the events of January, to show what happened, who is guilty, who's responsible, and what kind of measures are taken into places to mend the wounds that are inevitably there. And I think that the only way in which we can talk about a new Kazakhstan is that if we make the events of January to be the starting point of new Kazakhstan. We don't just, the government does not just hide everything under the carpet, but engage in a serious discussion with the population about what actually happened. And because what we hear from Mr. Vasylenko and the president in particular, President Tokayev, are, in my views, the right things, but they remain aspirational. We would like to see, as Mr. Devin said as well, we like to be concerned about the implementation. A new Kazakhstan cannot just be an aspiration in the mind of the government, has to have a practical dimension of transforming the society, the economy, and the political scene. And thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ranchevsky. I would like to ask you something immediately, because I want to make sure that I understand you correctly. When you spoke about the Iron Curtain, you referred to the unprecedented sanctions against Russia that may be an Iron Curtain, or you had in mind something else?
No, I was quoting what Mr. Vasylenko said a couple of days ago. It's fact that now, with the invasion of Russia, you have this inevitable division of pro-Russia and pro-anti-Russia, or pro-something else. And there is a clear division in the ways in which, for instance, the Putin regime lists unfriendly countries. And Kazakhstan does not want to be in that direction. So I don't think that it helps in any way, shape, or form to talk about those terms, but that's the kind of situation we're seeing. And if I got the words of Deputy Foreign Minister wrong, I apologize, but I think that that's what he said.
Thank you. Now, I would like to give you the possibility to react to what has been said, and I will also invite the other panelists to react to what has been said. Then I will open up for discussions with priority for the people here in the room. Then I'll follow with those online. But Roman, you can react to.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your comments, and Luke and Mr. Ameriks and the two professors. Clearly, we understand ourselves that first and foremost, there needs to be a closure on the investigation, and there is nobody more interested in turning the page on this by having the results of the investigation presented to the public and then presented to the courts and reviewed by the courts and authorized by the courts. There is nobody more interested in this than we ourselves, the people of Kazakhstan, and of course the president of Kazakhstan and the government of Kazakhstan. So you can be assured of that this investigation is done in the most thorough way. Overall, I need to tell this, that there are about 3,600 criminal cases now being investigated. The majority of them relate to theft, looting, possession of firearms, stealing of firearms, but there are also 45 cases relating to terrorism and 15 cases relating to state treason. So this is a very serious investigation being done by the government, by in fact 4 law enforcement agencies. Well, to give you an idea, prosecutor generals investigate 203 cases of torture that have been claimed by the victims, and it is important also to highlight that these are cases investigated by the Prosecutor General's office, meaning they are investigating the actions of the police. So no issue is left unturned, shall we say. No stone is left unturned, as they say, and the government is committed and the president is committed to the most serious and meaningful investigation. That's one thing. The second thing, I can clearly understand why the 2 professors would be skeptical about the possibility of these reforms being implemented. I would suggest we meet again at the end of this year and we touch base and check what was done, what hasn't been done, because I am telling you that the commitment of the president is to pass all those changes before the end of the year. This is very fast, I believe. We only have 10 months left, and the enormous legislative work that is ahead of us is still ahead of us, but the government and the president are not losing a single day. And in fact, today or yesterday, the president approved a nationwide plan to implement those reforms. So, of course, people can be skeptical. People will continue to be skeptical, and that's everybody's right to be skeptical. But I suggest we all look at the results of these efforts in some time. Of course, it requires some time. In terms of some of the specifics, I'd like to take on this issue that Mr. Pranino, how to say? Primiano said about the fact that there should be direct elections of mayors. Maybe they should be. I don't know why there is such a clear conviction that there should be. For example, I was just consulting with Mr. Devine just now. In France, the prefects, which is the governors, or what are they?
The governors would be political. That would be closer to other appointed. Because the mayors are political and they are elected.
They're elected.
But préfets are appointed.
Okay, préfets are appointed. In Kazakhstan, the governors of the regions are appointed by the president, and the president has now decided to make a step towards the election of the mayors by offering 2 options to the local assemblies to pick from, and then he will be appointing those who are picked by the local assemblies. I will also highlight the major push to make the local assemblies more directly in touch with the people, more directly responsible to the people, and that is being done by the introduction of the direct elections, not on the party list, but on the majoritarian principle for the local assemblies in districts. But also there will be a 50-50% now split between the proportional system and the majoritarian system for the election of the local assemblies at the regional level. and at the level of cities of national significance. And we have 3 such cities: Nur-Sultan, Almaty, and Shymkent. That means that these assemblies will have representatives that are directly elected by the people, that are directly elected in single vote constituencies, and that means that they are more in touch and more responsive to the people. So that is a conscientious choice that the president has made to strengthen the representative part of the local governance. I would also comment on the consequences, of course, of the, if I may already, of the sanctions being levied on Russia and their impact on Kazakhstan. Of course, we are reeling already. We are feeling the huge impact of these sanctions on our economy. Our national currency, tenge, lost initially 22% of its value. Now it's trading at 15% less to the euro and to the dollar than a month ago. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, because this, of course, leads to numerous other challenges to our economy, which is extremely closely connected to the Russian economy. The EU, as we all know, is our largest trading partner as a bloc. But individually, it's Russia, of course, which is the largest trading partner for Kazakhstan. And whatever happens in Russia is multiplied and have a direct impact on what happens in Kazakhstan's economy. So we are just in the beginning of taking on these huge challenges, which are now going to be faced by the Russian economy. However, I should say that we are, of course, members of the Eurasian Economic Union with Russia. We are members of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which was mentioned here. But that means that Kazakhstan has always been trying to pursue a multi-vector foreign policy, and we will continue to stay true to this multi-vector foreign policy. I did indeed give an interview to Die Welt, which ran a story on Monday, quoting me as saying that if there is a new Iron Curtain, we do not want to be behind it. And then I said, and that's why we hope that it doesn't fall again. And that's why we try to do our best also to prevent this from happening. Of course, we implement independent foreign policy. We implement political reforms, which some would say they are tantamount to changing the country more in line with the Western principles. In fact, our constitution was based on the French constitution originally. Then it was turned into a super presidential republic. Now we're going back to basically where more or less France is in terms of the structure of its political system. So we are doing all of this, of course, to strengthen the resilience of our country, facing the very strong headwinds economically, but we are doing it for our own purposes. We, of course, welcome critical comments and constructive engagement by the European Commission, by the scholars such as Mr. Primiano or Mr. Ansetti, and there are many others. So we are more than welcome. We are more than open to constructive criticism, constructive engagement. Please do continue to send those ideas, requests, and proposals on all areas, because they are all of them are being considered now. The country is also, in addition to political reforms, are developing a new economic course, and the government is due to approve that shortly. Mr. Primiano mentioned the progressive tax regime. Maybe that is also being considered, because indeed we had this flat rate of 10%, and maybe it's not that fair to the richer part of the population compared to the more disadvantaged part of the population. So the message is all issues are on the table. We are indeed in the beginning of this process. We are not doing it for the to please somebody else. We are doing it because we understand, and our president understands that this is the only way forward. He said it publicly that further economic development in Kazakhstan is impossible without political reforms, and he is extremely committed to these reforms. So we come back to reviewing and taking the stock of how good we fared, I suggest, at the end of the year.
Thank you. If there are no other reactions, maybe we shall move to the Q&A.
Can I just respond briefly?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah, and so please call me Chris. No need to be so formal. And so I do appreciate the Deputy Foreign Minister engaging in this kind of dialogue. I do really appreciate this because I lived in China for 5 years, and it's a very different story over there. So I appreciate this your willingness to engage in this kind of dialogue. And then I'll definitely take you up on that offer to come back at year's end to assess the changes. And in terms of, regarding your question about, why do I think there should be elections at the mayoral level or even at the governor level. This issue about holding officials accountable, for me, I think that is very important. And so people could feel as if they're holding their leaders, whether it's the mayor, whether it's the governor, that they have the power to vote them out of office or to vote them back into office. So this issue about people feeling that they're buying into the system, that they're part of the system as a result of their actions at the ballot box. So this whole issue about accountability, for me, is I think very important, and why there should be mayoral elections, gubernatorial elections, and so forth.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. I have a question from Alberto Turkstra, whom I can see here in the room. He addresses it to Mr. Vasilenko. What is your message to those organizations, Human Rights Watch and others, that are still calling for an international or at least a hybrid investigation into the January events? That's his question. I'm going also to ask on my part, Mr. Devinia, he said he spoke about an investigation in an independent manner to show that the approach is different. Maybe you can elaborate what kind of investigation is it compatible with Human Rights Watch being part of it, or yeah. So, Mr. Vasilenko, you have the floor first, and then Luc Devine.
Well, I would say that we are in direct touch with Human Rights Watch. There have been several rounds of conversations with Human Rights Watch. Again, a thing unprecedented in the past, but there are many things that are now unprecedented in the way Kazakhstan is engaging with the world. However, in terms of the independent investigation, I should say that the Kazakhstan's legislation clearly explains how, speaking of the hybrid investigation, for example, Kazakhstan's legislation clearly explains the rules for how independent experts can be involved in the investigation by the law enforcement authorities, and this is basically done at the level of specific requests, specific issues that experts are called upon to participate in the investigation. So basically, there is no such thing as independent investigation, which can be recognized by Kazakhstan's legislation or can be acted upon by Kazakhstan's courts. And as a matter of principle, I think that calling for an independent investigation means that there is a lack of trust in Kazakhstan's law enforcement bodies, authorities' ability to conduct fair investigation. That skepticism, of course, is understood given the past history, perhaps, but I would say that in the new Kazakhstan, that skepticism should be also a thing of the past, and the way that the investigations are concluded in the not too distant future, I hope will lay to rest this skepticism.
Luc Devine, is this a big issue, this independent investigation? Or?
It is. It is, of course, not for us to go into details who should be the investigators, etc. I think clearly we have called, but I think that ideally for Kazakhstan's reputation, calling international investigators would probably make things easier. Now, we heard from, and we suggested that. I wouldn't say we demanded it, certainly not, but we suggested that. Now, we heard quite early after the events, Kazakhstan authorities saying no, there will be no international investigations. Okay, we take note of that. I think what will matter is the outcome of the investigation. We'll know if the investigation is independent or not, and this is, I think, at the end of the day, more important. In other words, if only small guys are convicted, whereas you have events on a scale, the massiveness of the scale, suggesting, to say the least, some form of organization, that's a problem. If you don't have anyone, if you only have looters, etc., who are convicted, and don't get me wrong, I don't say looters should not be convicted, looters should be convicted. But, for instance, there's no law and order officers who are convicted if there are cases of torture which have been documented, which have been widely circulated. Again, I'm not an investigator, so I cannot judge this, but the more cases widely circulated, the more likely it is to happen, even if I know manipulation possible. Again, if there's nobody who's convicted, or only very low guys, it is an indication. I mean, we all know how this works. So I think Kazakhstan will be judged upon the outcome of this investigation, and for surely will be judged and scrutinized by the European Parliament, but this is not for me to comment, but I know it will happen. Just to say a couple of remarks on what was discussing about the reforms. Election of governors, I mean, there's not really an equivalent in French system to governor. The prefect is really administration. By contrast, mayors, of course, are all elected. And also we have this Conseil de département and Conseil régional. So I think what happens is that people indeed feel, I mean, I very much agree with the accountability as a matter of principle. And this is valid for many, I would say, parts of the states, including judges. Judges being independent doesn't mean they should not be accountable. There should be a system, if a corrupt judge is proven to be corrupted, that is removed. And it doesn't happen often, but it happens sometimes. It doesn't mean the justice is not independent when there are cases like this. So I think this is really where the matter is. And I would like to say also that, of course, it's not for us to tell Kazakhstan how they should reform or how the constitution should or not be more or less copied than the Fifth Republic constitution. But what we, as general in the EU, support is there are international organizations who have specialized offices. I'm thinking of the OEC, Office for Democracy and Human Rights, who regularly can be solicited opinions, etc. I think they should be part of this. It will increase the credibility of the reforms, similar in Council of Europe, Venice Commission. I mean, we have all that. So I think again, this is important. And I would also say that more democracy doesn't mean less resilience. And if there's one country in which I think, when I say this, is Ukraine. I think Ukraine is teaching the world a lesson in resilience with the aggression they're facing, and they certainly are democratic and also supported by the EU in these democracy efforts. Last word, I mean, I don't know about the Iron Curtain comparisons. All I want to say is that this is not EU or the West versus Russia and its friends. There are many countries that are friends with Russia. We have no problem with that, including Kazakhstan. And you reminded Eurasian Union membership of Kazakhstan or CSTO membership of Kazakhstan. Similarly, Armenia is in the same situation. Now, with both these countries, I mean, Armenia was on top of it in Eastern Partnership, and with Kazakhstan, we have agreed with far-reaching bilateral agreements despite that. So it is the evidence we don't do a zero-sum game. But the war in Ukraine is a different story. This is an attack on international law, order, about principles. And here, when you look at who is with Russia, there are only 4 countries in the world. 4 countries who voted against these resolutions tabled by European Union member states and others. And this is Belarus, Syria, Eritrea, and North Korea. And that's it. So it's not a question, I don't think we should confuse topics here. Because the Iron Curtain was rather Russia and its friends. Here it's a different story, the dividing line, because we don't have a problem that Russia has friends, evidenced by our policy. But we do have a problem that Russia violating international law principles. So I leave it at that for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. I have more questions. I'm going to read 2 of them. One is, again, from Alberto Turkstra. It is addressed to Dr. Anceski. He reminds that in January, Dr. Anceski wrote or argued that the presence of Russian troops on Kazakh territory ends the era of multi-vectorism in Kazakh foreign policy. And he asks, considering that the CSTO intervention was quite limited and low profile, do you still stand by this argument? The other question I'm going to read is for Roman Vasilenko. It comes from Miroshid Karshiev. The question is the following. Europe was one of primary destinations for Kazakh government-funded Bolashak scholars. That was a scholarship program in the previous period. And still, yeah. In January, President Tokayev talked about reorientation of the program, sending young people to study at technical universities, as he put it, maybe primarily to Russia. Well, can you clarify the latest developments? Personally, I'm not aware of this statement by the president, but maybe Dr. Anceski will start with the question whether you stand by what you wrote probably in January.
Yeah, I do, even because what I wrote in January was a continuation of a research project which I had for 10 years. So I wrote a book about Kazakhstan foreign policy. I have been skeptical about the multivectorism for a bit because I saw that in the last 10 years, the relationship with Russia became more and more prominent within the wider Kazakhstani foreign policy paradigm, not only in political terms, the intensity of the political ties, but also, perhaps most importantly, in economic terms. And that's the result of expanded membership in the Eurasian Union. But so I sort of stand with that position, even though I recognize that with the situation in Ukraine, the context has changed again. And in fact, if I may ask a question to Mr. Vasilenko, which follows up from the one that I have just been asked, is that does the new Kazakhstan have a new foreign policy?
Okay. You are doing my job. You are asking questions, but that's good. That's very good. Okay. So 2 questions for Roman Vasilenko. Your question, which probably is a bigger one, and the other one about the Bolashak scholars and the future of this program.
Well, I'll perhaps answer this question first. We have what is known as a concept of foreign policy. It was adopted slightly more than a year ago, and it remains the fundamental document upon which our foreign policy is based. And we believe that it was a very solid, is and will be a very solid principle upon which we have been building our foreign policy, which is a multi-vector foreign policy. It will continue to be the underlying principle of our foreign policy. So the new Kazakhstan will maintain the policy because it was and is a wise policy, I firmly believe. So I'm afraid I can't give you a nice sound bite by saying that a new Kazakhstan will have a new foreign policy. In terms of the Bolashak scholarship, it continues in earnest. The idea is to indeed continue to train students abroad. The idea, though, is to turn them more to turn the attention more to the technical specialties. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about the idea to instill in society the cult of labor, of hard work, of raise the prestige of the technical work. Because originally in the 90s, in the 2000s, we had so many lawyers, economists, and I don't have anything against these professions, but the accent was made very heavily towards this profession. Now we need to switch and turn this around into a larger focus on technical specialties. President Tokayev did mention Russia as a country where more students should go to study technical specialties, but he also mentioned that Kazakhstan should open branches of leading technical universities in Kazakhstan, and we are talking to European countries to see which universities will be willing to send to set up branches in Kazakhstan. So that also shows you that we are open to European system. Kazakhstan is part of the Bologna process for more than 10 years now, I think. And basically our system of education is based on the Western system of education, and we are more than open to such partnerships.
You remember when I said that most of the questions will be directed to you?
I don't think it's fair to Mr. Amerix, who spends his lunch here with us, or to Mr. Devin.
It's like this. One of them is about Central Asia, how the developments with Russian war in Ukraine is going to reflect on the situation in Central Asia. I know it's a big question, but we don't have much time. I think we have 5 minutes left. And the other question comes from Dr. Abdul Rahim Abdul Wahid, the chairman of the Media Hub International. That could be a nice conclusion. How Kazakhstan is planning to build back the full economic, social, and security life better? That
What was the one before that?
Central Asia.
Central Asia. Well, I perhaps should say a few words about the dynamics in foreign policy, in cooperation in Central Asia over the past 5 or 6 years, and these dynamics, despite the some setbacks and conflicts on the border, say, between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan last year, but this dynamics has been more or less positive, I should say, and already 3 summits of Central Asian heads of state took place, and the next one is planned for this year. Of course, there are many regional issues which we need to be discussing between the 5 countries. One issue, for example, of course, that is at the top of our agenda is water management. The other issue, of course, is dealing with Afghanistan after the withdrawal of the West and the ascent of the Taliban to power. There are, of course, issues about raising the volume of internal intra-regional trade, etc. So this dynamics continues. All the countries feel there is a great value in stronger regional cooperation and in stronger regional coordination of efforts, including as the aftermath of the situation in Ukraine becomes more clear for our economies. So all of the economies in Central Asia are dependent on the situation in Russia in one way or another. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, to the greatest extent perhaps, are dependent on the remittances of the labor workers, of the guest workers in Russia. So they are feeling a much stronger impact even than Kazakhstan. So we will continue to strengthen our cooperation in the region. We are also very much hoping that our cooperation with the EU in the EU and Central Asia format is also strengthened, and there are a lot of programs that the EU implements in cooperation with Central Asia. We appreciate all of them, such as BOMKA or KADAP, and there is also an initiative on water. So all of these are very important. They will be more important going forward. By the way, what will be more also important is continued EU support for engagement with Kazakhstan by organizations such as, Luke, you mentioned ODIHR of the OEC. We are more than open to this cooperation, and the ODIHR is more than welcome to come. Venice Commission is also, Kazakhstan is part of that, and we have never shied to ask for Venice Commission's opinions. In other words, we are open to this engagement. Central Asia is evolving as a subject of the international community, shall we say, and its engagement with the European Union will be more important going forward, given what's going on in relations between the West and Russia. I don't know how to respond in 30 seconds to the question.
This was the topic of the conference.
Yes.
Basically, I think that I was instructed to be very sharp with the time. I think we have maybe 1 minute left. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ameriks to draw up his conclusions.
Yes, I would like to say very briefly. First, politically, I think only 2 weeks before we know about these political proposals for changing many things, we can't believe, can or can't, but it's so important for us. And I very appreciate these announcements for all the proposals for President of Tokayev. We will see how it will implement, but it's too early to now to say we can believe or not to believe it. And second thing, yes, the delegation of Central Asia will plan to go to Kazakhstan is the second week in April, and also we will discuss about investigation of January's all commitments from the Kazakhstan part for clear, transparent and everything what happened in January. Yes, in person. Yes, it's very important. And but I think now I also like to underline it's so very important. Kazakhstan is a partner for European Union, and we try to do how we just create our relationship in the situation when the war happened so very close to the borders of Kazakhstan and Europe, and it's also very important for us. Sorry,
thank you very much. We are all adapting. Thank you very much to everyone. It was a pleasure. We are indeed very sharp on time. Thank you for those who came to the Euractiv office. Thank you for those who followed us online. Please read Euractiv. We will write a story relating the debate, and read Euractiv every day. Follow us on Twitter. And by the way, Mr. Roman Vasilenko, you had a fantastic Twitter feed when President Tokayev was. That was a great source of information live. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.